They say Rome never truly sleeps. By day, the city glows with sunlight upon marble ruins, alive with laughter, voices, and the weight of history pressing gently against modern life. But when night falls, and the tourists leave, a different Rome stirs. Shadows creep across broken stones. Winds whistle through ancient arches, and something older than memory rises from beneath the earth. And nowhere does this unease feel stronger than at the Colosseum, the eternal arena, a place where death was not just an event, but entertainment, ritual, and spectacle. In 2015, a security guard patrolling the Colosseum after midnight reported something that has haunted him ever since. He had done the shift dozens of times before, walking the perimeter, shining his flashlight across the cavernous ruins, listening to his own footsteps echo. But that night was different. He heard the sound of metal striking metal, faint, rhythmic, like swords clashing in the distance. He followed it deeper into the arena, thinking perhaps another guard was already inside. But when he entered the central floor, he froze. The sound grew louder, echoing all around, yet no one was there. Then, in the torchlight glow of his flashlight, he saw figures in the stands, vague, shadowy, rows of them sitting silently, watching. He blinked, and they were gone, just stone and emptiness. But the sound of clashing blades persisted, joined now by something worse, the roar of a crowd, not a living crowd, but a memory, thundering from the walls, vibrating the ground beneath his feet. He dropped his light, and when he picked it back up, he swore he saw blood pooled where he stood. He ran, never returning to the night shift again. Was it his imagination, the tricks of exhaustion and silence? Or did he glimpse something Rome itself refuses to forget? The restless spirits of tens of thousands who died here, still fighting, still screaming, still watching. Before we dive deeper into this story, let me ask you something. If ghosts are real, if echoes of suffering can cling to stone, then what kind of hauntings could linger in a place where over 400,000 souls perished, and where blood once ran in rivers across the sand? Could the Colosseum itself be more than a ruin? Could it be a prison of souls, feeding on centuries of agony? If you want to explore that mystery, if you're drawn to stories where history bleeds into horror, then make sure you subscribe to this channel. We go beyond surface history, into the shadows, into the whispers, into the places where the past refuses to die. And tonight, you and I are stepping into Rome's eternal arena of ghosts. The Colosseum was born from blood. Built under Emperor Vespasian and completed by his son Titus in 80 AD, it was Rome's greatest architectural wonder, a symbol of imperial power and divine spectacle. But behind the grandeur lay cruelty, carefully staged and consumed by an insatiable audience. Up to 50,000 people would gather in its marble seats, the poor sitting shoulder to shoulder with nobles, senators, even emperors. They came to watch death, to cheer for it, to demand it. In its inaugural games, which lasted 100 days, more than 9,000 animals were slaughtered. Lions, elephants, bears, and crocodiles, dragged from distant lands, starved, and forced to fight gladiators or each other. Blood slicked the sand, bodies piled high, and Rome roared with approval. Over the centuries, historians estimate nearly 500,000 humans died here, alongside 1 million wild animals. Each stone of the Colosseum is soaked in screams. Imagine the terror of a gladiator dragged from the cells below, hearing the crowd chant for his death. Imagine the Christian martyr praying desperately as lions prowled from their cages, the smell of meat luring them closer. Imagine the condemned criminal chained to a post, dressed as mythological prey, awaiting death in a gruesome reenactment staged for entertainment. To Rome, these were spectacles of power, reminders that the empire could command life and death. But to those who died, the arena was a nightmare without escape. Even in broad daylight, visitors report unease. Cold gusts of wind rush through corridors where the sun cannot reach. Whispers echo faintly, impossible to trace. Some hear chanting, others screams. Tourists claim to feel sudden nausea, dizziness, or the sensation of being watched by thousands of unseen eyes. Paranormal investigators describe the Colosseum as a nexus of energy. Too much blood spilled, too much suffering endured, for the earth to stay silent. One of the most chilling accounts came in 2009, when a group of tourists separated briefly from their guide in the underground hypogeum, the labyrinth beneath the arena where gladiators and animals were held before battle. The group reported hearing chains dragging across the floor. One woman swore she felt a hand grip her arm, though no one stood beside her. When they screamed for help, their guide returned, only to find them pale, shaking, and huddled against the wall. Later, reviewing photographs from that day, a faint figure appeared in the corner of one image, tall, armored, with a helmet glinting in the dark. Skeptics argue these are tricks of the imagination, fueled by knowledge of the Colosseum's violent past. But can imagination truly explain why electronics frequently malfunction inside? Why recordings capture faint growls and shouts when no one else is present? Why some visitors leave, convinced something followed them home? The Colosseum is more than ruin. It is memory carved into stone. And memory, when fed by centuries of blood, does not sleep. It festers, it watches, and sometimes it answers back. If the Colosseum's arena was the stage of death, then the hypogeum, the underground labyrinth beneath it, was its beating heart, its machinery of terror. Few modern visitors truly understand what lay beneath their feet as they walk the ruined floor. Hidden chambers, cages, and passageways stretched like a maze, a place of waiting and dread. It was here that gladiators, criminals, and animals were kept before being unleashed to the roaring crowd above. It was here the condemned would sit in suffocating darkness, hearing the faint echoes of cheers, the groaning of wooden machinery, the grinding of pulleys, and the scent of iron and blood wafting down through the cracks in the floorboards. Some called it the stomach of the beast, and it is said the hypogeum still holds the stomach's hunger. Even now, guides report tourists suddenly fainting below ground, claiming they couldn't breathe, as though invisible hands pressed against their throats. One man who visited in the early 2000s swore he felt the distinct sensation of a sword tip scraping against his ribs. When he looked down, his shirt bore a thin cut, though there was nothing sharp around him. But perhaps such hauntings are inevitable when so much blood was spilled for spectacle. For centuries, gladiators were Rome's reluctant celebrities. Men torn from conquered lands, trained in brutal camps, and forced to fight until death or rare freedom. Some embraced it, carving their names into history with blade and shield. Others despised it, their lives stolen, their dignity crushed beneath the crowd's hunger for blood. Legends persist of gladiators who cursed the arena with their dying breaths. One story tells of Drusus, a Thracian fighter said to have killed over 50 men. During one match, mortally wounded, he fell to his knees and looked directly into the emperor's eyes. Instead of begging for mercy, he raised his hand and spat blood onto the sand, muttering words witnesses could not understand. Minutes later, lightning cracked across a clear sky, startling the crowd. Drusus was killed, his body dragged away, but for weeks after, gladiators swore they heard his footsteps in the hypogeum, pacing, waiting for another chance to fight. Even today, people walking those tunnels late at night claim to hear boots striking the stone floor, the sound approaching, then stopping suddenly, as if someone stands just behind them. And it wasn't only gladiators who left curses behind. The Colosseum became infamous as a site of Christian martyrdom, though scholars debate the exact scale. To Rome, these men and women were criminals, traitors to the empire's gods. To themselves, they were saints, their deaths sacrifices of faith. Some were burned alive, some crucified, others torn apart by animals in spectacles designed to humiliate and horrify. One ancient account speaks of a woman named Aurelia, condemned for refusing to renounce her beliefs. She was thrown into the arena dressed as a mythological sacrifice, bound in chains, her body painted in gold dust. Lions were released, their growls echoing through the stone. But according to witnesses, the animals circled her, snarling, but would not attack. The crowd grew restless, chanting for blood. Eventually, soldiers forced the beasts closer with spears. Only then did the lions leap, tearing her apart before tens of thousands of screaming Romans. But the story doesn't end there. For years afterward, gladiators reported seeing a golden figure in the stands during night training sessions, glowing faintly, watching them. Several collapsed in terror, swearing they had seen Aurelia's face, bloodied but radiant, her lips moving in silent prayer. Whispers say her ghost still walks the upper levels, appearing most often to women who wander alone. Some describe her as protective, others as furious, her golden shimmer flickering like dying firelight. Paranormal researchers visiting the Colosseum in the 1990s recorded faint singing near the northern gate, a woman's voice humming in Latin. The recording cut out abruptly with a high-pitched screech, and the team's equipment refused to function for the rest of the night. Yet perhaps the most chilling presences in the Colosseum are not gladiators or martyrs, but the faceless crowds themselves. Because the arena was never just about the fighters, it was about the people who demanded blood. Imagine 50,000 voices chanting for death, 50,000 eyes locked on the condemned, 50,000 souls feeding the arena's appetite. That kind of energy doesn't disappear. In the 1970s, a group of students broke into the Colosseum after hours, sneaking wine and instruments to play under the stars. They laughed, sang, and passed bottles between them until one girl, Alessandra, suddenly froze. She said the air had gone thick, like pressing into water. Then she whispered, "Do you hear it?" At first, her friends heard nothing, just the wind. But then faintly, like a storm approaching, came the sound of voices. Not one or two, but hundreds, swelling, growing louder. Panicked, they gathered their things and ran for the exit. But one boy tripped on the broken stone and swore he felt hands, dozens of them, clutching at his ankles, cold and strong, pulling him down. When his friends dragged him free, red marks circled his legs like bruises. For weeks afterward, he dreamed of being in the arena, blinded by sunlight, unable to move as the crowd roared for his death. Some scholars suggest what we call ghosts are simply memories burned into places by immense emotion, like echoes, endlessly replaying. If so, then the Colosseum is one of the loudest echoes on earth. Every cry for mercy ignored, every cheer for blood spilled, every final scream. They all seeped into the stone, into the earth, into the very air. And they rise again when silence falls. What unsettles researchers most is that the Colosseum's hauntings are not passive. They seem to react. Visitors whisper about the sensation of being studied, judged, weighed, as though something within the arena still thirsts for the spectacle of human suffering. One psychic who entered in the early 2000s described it best. The Colosseum does not have ghosts in it. The Colosseum itself is the ghost. Perhaps that's why so many who step inside feel drained, as though something has been taken from them. Perhaps that's why others feel compelled to return again and again, drawn back by an invisible hunger. And perhaps that's why, on quiet nights, when Rome sleeps and the Colosseum broods in silence, faint voices rise from its depths, reminding us that while empires fall, the dead do not always rest. When the Roman Empire finally crumbled, many of its grand monuments fell into ruin. Temples were stripped of marble, aqueducts collapsed, and roads that once carried legions grew wild with weeds. Yet the Colosseum remained, scarred, battered, but unbroken. To the common people of medieval Rome, it was not just a ruin. It was a wound that would not heal. The Christian Church, now the dominant power, did not know what to do with it. Some saw it as a place of martyrdom, sacred with the blood of saints. Others whispered it was cursed, a theater of cruelty where the devil himself had once delighted in the slaughter of innocents. In time, the Church abandoned any attempt to sanctify it, and the Colosseum was left to fester in ambiguity, half holy, half damned. By the 6th century, the arena was already associated with sorcery. Local legends claimed witches and necromancers crept into its chambers at night, chanting in forgotten tongues, summoning the shades of gladiators to fight once more. One chronicler described torchlight flickering through the arches, accompanied by the clash of swords, though no soldiers marched Rome's streets that night. The Hippodrome, the maze beneath the arena floor, became the subject of particular dread. Medieval Romans called it La Bocca dell'Inferno, the mouth of hell. They believed demons used the chambers as gates to emerge into the mortal world. Strange fires were seen flickering from cracks in the ground. Livestock that grazed near the Colosseum was sometimes found mutilated, blood drained from their bodies, tongues cut out. Farmers refused to pasture their animals anywhere within sight of the amphitheater after sunset. And yet, for all the fear it inspired, the Colosseum drew people. Not for entertainment anymore, but for rituals. Criminal gangs, alchemists, and supposed magicians used its broken walls as shelter. The poorest of Rome made homes within its arches, huddling against the night, telling their children never to wander into the inner shadows where the gladiators still walked. One of the earliest surviving tales of supernatural terror within the Colosseum dates back to the 8th century. It tells of a monk named Brother Aelius, who entered the ruin determined to cleanse it of evil once and for all. Carrying only a wooden cross and a jug of holy water, he ventured into the Hippodrome at midnight. Hours passed, but the monk never returned. At dawn, villagers went searching. They found his cross snapped in half, the jug shattered, and long gouges carved into the stone walls as if by claws. Of Brother Aelius himself, there was no trace. The church hushed the story, but whispers spread. Soon, pilgrims avoided the Colosseum entirely, walking wide circles around it, as if proximity alone might draw curses upon them. By the 12th century, darker legends circulated. Travelers spoke of seeing hooded figures gathering by torchlight within the arena, chanting around fires. Locals claimed these were cults of necromancers performing blood sacrifices to awaken the spirits of the damned. One chilling tale describes a ritual in which a man was bound in chains at the arena AS center, his screams echoing through the night. When villagers mustered courage to investigate, they found only charred chains and a circle of blackened sand that no rain could ever wash away. Such stories fueled a terrifying belief that the Colosseum itself demanded blood, not as spectacle, but as sustenance. Rome, as ordinary citizens, began to see the amphitheater less as a ruin, and more as a living entity, a monstrous stone beast that had feasted on death for centuries and refused to starve. One story from the 14th century remains particularly haunting. It involves a group of thieves who chose the Colosseum as their hideout, convinced the place's reputation would scare away any pursuers. For weeks, they stored stolen goods in the Hippodrome and boasted of mocking the ghost stories. One night, however, neighbors heard screaming, guttural, primal, inhuman. At dawn, authorities entered. The thieves were gone. The only trace was blood splattered across the broken stones, as though someone had been torn apart, yet no bodies were ever found. As centuries passed, Rome's citizens began to view the Colosseum as cursed ground. Superstitions grew. Newly married couples refused to walk near it, lest their union be doomed. Children were told that if they gazed too long at its arches, they would see faces staring back, faces of the dead. Priests warned that any who removed stone or relics from the Colosseum would be haunted until they returned them. But the most terrifying legends came from travelers who braved the arena after dark. Many spoke of hearing the roar of an invisible crowd, a deafening swell of voices, cheers, and screams filling the air, though the stands were empty. Others swore they saw gladiators appear like phantoms, locked in combat, their swords striking with sparks, their wounds spilling blood that vanished before it touched the ground. Some witnesses even claimed to feel drops of blood on their skin, though nothing stained their clothing. One French knight in the 15th century wrote in his journal of seeing a horned figure standing in the arena, S center, taller than any man, draped in shadows, its eyes burning red. It raised its hand toward him, and he felt as though the air itself crushed his lungs. He fled in terror, never to set foot in Rome again. Historians today dismiss such tales as folklore, born from the ruins' imposing silhouette and dark history. But even skeptics admit the Colosseum holds a peculiar weight, a heaviness in the air, a silence that feels alive. Some suggest it is psychological, a natural response to standing in a place where tens of thousands died. Others whisper it is something more. Because while ruins crumble and empires fade, the Colosseum remains. It has outlived emperors, popes, and plagues. It has watched generations come and go, seen wars rage and cities burn. And through it all, it waits, holding its secrets in stone and shadow. There is a reason locals once called it Il Colosseo dei Demoni, the Colosseum of Demons. They believed it was not merely haunted by the dead, but possessed by something older, something born from the blood sacrifices of the empire. Some say the arena itself was a ritual, a circle of stone where death became worship, where violence fed an unseen power. And if that is true, then every scream that once shook its walls, every life spilled on its sands, was not entertainment, but an offering. Even today, when tourists wander its arches with cameras and guides speak of emperors and architecture, some pause without knowing why. Their skin prickles, their stomach tightens, and they feel eyes upon them. They glance at the arena floor shattered and silent, and for a moment they almost hear it. The roar of the crowd, the clash of swords, the scream of the dying, the laughter of something inhuman echoing just beyond the edge of hearing. The Colosseum has stood for nearly 2,000 years. It may yet stand for thousands more. But perhaps we should ask ourselves, does stone remember? And if so, what happens when memories are not of triumph or beauty, but of slaughter? Does the Colosseum stand as a monument to Rome's glory, or as a prison where the dead and the damned still perform for an audience that will never leave? Because if the legends are true, then the arena is not abandoned. It is still alive, and it is still hungry. The Colosseum is no longer the arena of blood and sand that once defined the Roman Empire. Today, it stands as one of the most famous monuments in the world, visited by millions each year. Tourists photograph its arches, school groups shuffle through its tunnels, and historians lecture on its architecture and engineering brilliance. But beneath the tourist gloss, the Colosseum has never truly escaped its shadow. Its reputation as a place of death and haunting persists. And for those who linger too long, wander too far, or dare to walk its grounds after sunset, the past sometimes seems to step forward into the present. By day, the Colosseum is a wonder, sunlight draping its arches in golden warmth, guides explaining where emperors once sat and where gladiators waited their turn. But as night falls, the arena transforms. The air grows heavy, shadows lengthen unnaturally, and silence clings to the ruins like a shroud. Even seasoned security guards confess they dread the overnight shifts. Some refuse to patrol the hypogum at all, saying the silence there is not silence at all, but listening. One guard, interviewed anonymously in the 1990s, described his experience. He had walked the lower corridors with only a flashlight, checking the old stonework for signs of damage. As he turned a corner, he heard it, the unmistakable clank of iron against stone, like chains dragging. He froze. The sound grew louder, echoing through the tunnel. Then came the footsteps, heavy, deliberate, as if a man in armor walked behind him. He spun, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, but there was nothing there. Just stone walls and empty corridors. Terrified, he fled, and when he returned with another guard minutes later, the corridor was silent. Yet when he raised his flashlight to the wall, deep gouges were fresh in the stone, as if clawed by something that had followed him. Stories like this are not isolated. In fact, the Colosseum has become a hotspot for paranormal investigators in the last century. Ghost hunters have brought cameras, EVP recorders, and thermal sensors into the arena, determined to prove or disprove its legends. Many walked away shaken. One investigation in the early 2000s recorded sounds that defy explanation. In the dead of night, with the arena empty, the microphones picked up the distant roar of a crowd. Thousands of voices screaming, cheering, chanting. Yet the stands were empty. The night was calm, and not a single tourist remained inside. The researchers played the recording back repeatedly, convinced they had captured something extraordinary. Some dismissed it as interference or echoes of city noise. Others insisted it was undeniable proof that the Colosseum is still alive with the ghosts of its past. And then there are the apparitions. Countless visitors have reported seeing figures out of the corner of their eyes. Soldiers in Roman armor, slaves in rags, or shadowy forms darting between the arches. A few even swear they saw lions pacing the arena floor, eyes glowing in the dark, before vanishing in silence. One chilling account comes from a British tourist in 2013 who claimed she saw a gladiator, bloodied and exhausted, stagger toward her from the shadows. He reached out a hand as if begging for water. When she gasped and dropped her camera, the figure dissolved into mist. Later, when she reviewed the photos she had taken, one image showed a faint figure behind her, tall, armored, with eyes like burning coals. Skeptics argue such visions are tricks of light and imagination, fueled by the Colosseum's atmosphere and history. And perhaps they are right. But those who have stood in the arena alone at night insist the fear is real, not imagined, not psychological, but something pressing down, as though the weight of 2,000 years of death still saturates the stones. The most terrifying experiences often come not from tourists or ghost hunters, but from locals, Romans whose families have lived in the city for generations. One story passed quietly among residents involves a group of teenagers who broke into the Colosseum after dark in the 1980s. They wanted to prove their courage, to spend the night where their ancestors feared to tread. At first, they laughed and told stories, shining flashlights across the crumbling arches. But as the night deepened, the laughter died. One boy swore he heard chanting, low, guttural, echoing through the corridors. The others mocked him, until the sound grew louder, clearer, and multiple voices joined in. Terrified, they tried to leave, but when they reached the main arch, it was sealed shut, though there had been no door when they entered. Panic set in. Some claim they saw robed figures watching them from the shadows, though when the police finally found them hours later, the Colosseum was empty. The boys never returned, and when asked what they saw, most refused to speak. One, years later, admitted in a whisper, "It wasn't ghosts. It was something worse, something that wanted us." Legends say the Colosseum is not merely haunted by the dead, but cursed by the blood it consumed. The arena demanded sacrifice in life, and in some way, it still demands it in death. Guides quietly tell tourists of a superstition that if you stand at the center of the arena and listen carefully, you may hear whispers calling your name. Some laugh at this. Others, after standing there, leave pale and shaken, unwilling to repeat what they heard. Modern Rome has tried to embrace the Colosseum's haunted legacy. Ghost tours lead visitors through its arches at night, recounting tales of gladiators, martyrs, and restless spirits. Some walk away entertained. Others swear they left with something darker clinging to them. One tourist even reported waking in her hotel room to find a shadow at the foot of her bed, a man in chains, face twisted in agony, who vanished only when she screamed. Science may scoff at such tales, but history provides little comfort. The Colosseum is not just stone and mortar, it is blood and bone, soaked into the ground, echoing in the walls. More than 400,000 people are estimated to have died within its walls. That is not just history, that is trauma, imprinted on a place that refuses to let go. And perhaps that is why the Colosseum endures. Empires fall, cities burn, earthquakes strike, yet the arena stands. Not because it is a marvel of engineering, though it is, but because it is something more. Something fed by the fear it inspires. Something that thrives not on stone, but on memory, on legend, on belief. Every tourist who shudders at its shadows, every investigator who hears phantom cheers, every guard who feels unseen eyes watching, they keep it alive. Which raises a terrifying question. Is the Colosseum haunted because so many died there? Or do the dead remain because the Colosseum will not release them? Tonight, if you stood within its arches alone, would you hear the whispers? Would you see the shadows? Would you feel the past reaching for you? Or worse, would the Colosseum notice you? Because Rome is eternal. The empire may be gone, but its arena remains. And if stone does remember, then the Colosseum remembers everything. The blood, the screams, the fear, the power. And it is still waiting.